morning. Hayom Yom, Zayin Elul. So in the year that Hayom Yom was written in 1943, so Zayin Elul was Tuesday, Parshas Kiseitze. And the third reading of Parshas Kiseitze contains the words B'tzua Dakuh, where it's describing a badly wounded man, and it says a man with crushed or very badly wounded testicles. And the word Dakuh, which means crushed, so there's an argument about how it should be written. Some SIFREI Torah have it written with an Aleph, Dalet Kaf Aleph, and some SIFREI Torah have it written with a Hey, Dalet Kaf Hey. And today's Hayom Yom, the Rebbe tells us that the Alter Rebbe said that the correct way to write it is with an Aleph. And just to prove the point and demonstrate the point, so he quotes the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe says that in the city of Prague, so there's an ancient Torah, which the Maharal in Prague writes came to the city in his days, and they have a tradition that this Torah was checked over by Ezra HaSefer himself. Ezra HaSefer was one of the greatest Jews who ever lived and the greatest Jewish scribe to ever live. And Ezra checked this Torah himself, and since it's such an old Torah, they barely read from it. They only read from it once a year on Simchas Torah, the day that we're celebrating the Torah. That's when they take it out and read. But the rest of the year, it's rolled up and kept in the shul, and it's rolled up to the section of Shema. And the Friedrich Rebbe said that in 1908, he was in Prague, and he managed to get a look at the Torah, and he was able to examine the Torah, and he was curious, so he checked this part of the Torah, and he saw that it was written with an Aleph. So that's a major proof that the correct way to write it is with an Aleph. Additionally, says the Friedrich Rebbe, another proof, not as conclusive, not as authoritative, but the year earlier in 1907, he had been in Worms, in the German city of Worms, and over there they have a very, very old Torah, which they have a tradition is the Torah of Maharam Rothenburg, Reb Meir of Rothenburg, who was a 13th century German rabbi, one of the greatest rabbis of all time. And there's a very famous story how he got thrown into prison and they wanted a ransom and he didn't want them to pay the ransom, even though the Jews wanted to pay it. And while he was in prison, right before he died in prison actually, he wrote a Torah. And that Torah ending up with the Jewish community in Worms. And the Friedrich Rebbe said that they have a tradition that this Torah is that actual Torah. And he says, again, I looked at the Torah, I examined it, I checked in Parshas Kiseitze, and again, B'tzua Dakuh was written with an Aleph. Now, in the bottom, the Rebbe sends us to look at three sources on the subject. One is Shiayris Yehuda, Divrei Nechemya, and Mishnas Avrohom. So Shiayris Yehuda was written by the Alter Rebbe's brother. And over there, he writes, he's the one who tells us that the Alter Rebbe said it should be with an Aleph. And in fact, there was a Torah that they had that was written with a Hey, and the Alter Rebbe had it changed to an Aleph. And then the Shiayris Yehuda gives all kinds of grammatical arguments and reasons why it should be with an Aleph over a Hey. The next source, which is the Divrei Nechemya, which was written by one of the Alter Rebbe's main students, so he questions all of Shiayris Yehuda's grammatical arguments and proofs. He disagrees with all of them, but he says the testimony which the Shiayris Yehuda gives, that he himself saw the Alter Rebbe say it should be with an Aleph and switch it, that's unquestionable, and therefore we have to write all our SIFREI Torah with an Aleph. But he's very skeptical of, and he highly doubts, if a Torah which has already been written with a Hey should actually be switched to an Aleph. And as to the testimony and the story which Shiayris Yehuda tells, so he says it's possible, he doesn't know for sure, but he says it's possible that in that situation, wherever town they were in, that was the only Torah they had. And since it was the only Torah, the Alter Rebbe felt that it needed to be switched from a Hey to an Aleph, the correct writing. But he says if you have many SIFREI Torah and one of them has a Hey, you should not switch it. He doesn't feel like you should probably switch it. And the third source, the Mishnas Avrohom, was written by a very smart Jew, and it's a very authoritative work, and it's basically like a Shulchan Aruch on all things Safros related. And on this question of should B'tzua Dakuh be with an Aleph or a Hey, so he quotes all the opinions and he goes back and forth, and he quotes the Alter Rebbe's opinion, and he doesn't reach a conclusion. He leaves it inconclusive. But he does in the end write how he looked at many of the SIFREI Torah of many of the greatest rabbis, and all of them had Alephs. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.